Okay, Michael William Bennett. You wrote a book called The Archetype of Reality. What is the archetype of reality?
Well, besides being the title of the book, the archetype of reality is my conception of the blueprint of consciousness and life. Within the book, I provide a diagram, the archetypal diagram, that I use for illustrating and organizing what I recognize as the components of consciousness and life. So if you can imagine consciousness, life, resolved into a set of components, conceptually resolved into a set of components, and organized two-dimensionally in the form of a diagram, that is what I call the archetypal diagram. It's also what I refer to as the archetype of reality. It is a set of components that constitute a perfectly proportioned, self-sustaining totality. The archetype of reality is my definition of consciousness and life.
Okay, and how do you define consciousness?
Consciousness, when it's reflected conceptually, can be defined as self-knowledge, self-recognition, a sense of oneself as a being within the universe. Now, since we're having a conversation, or in this case an interview, I'm putting into words what is more than thought. So I'm reflecting a process. I'm reflecting a subject using words, concepts. But it's important to understand that the reflection is not the thing itself. When I look into a mirror, I see a reflection of myself. That reflection, although I may point at it and say, this is me, that reflection itself is not who I am. Now, my definition of consciousness is a reflection of consciousness within conceptualization. And what I try to do is create a clear reflection of the experiential reality of consciousness. And I do that by using the archetypal diagram and by using the 22 tarot trumps. Because in the trumps, in the 22 tarot trumps, I recognized an illustrated allegory of consciousness. To ask what is consciousness is essential for understanding ourselves. With my book, with the model of conscious development that I write about, I explore that question. I explore what is consciousness. In its most elementary form, it's our simple sense of being present. But the problem is, we only touch base with that for a moment, and then we lose it. We get caught up in thought, we get caught up in emotions, we get distracted by sensory impressions, by the environment, and we only presume that we remain conscious. The fact is, the consciousness that we know is fleeting. Conscious development is a science whereby we learn to sustain our sense of being present, to expand it, to unfold it, until it becomes self-sustaining, until it unfolds the sum of its potential, which is what the science of conscious development is about. And that's what I write about.
You've used the phrase paradigm of separation. What is the paradigm of separation?
The paradigm of separation is the perspective in which we ordinarily live. We see ourselves, we perceive ourselves as separate beings. The thought process that remains involuntary in most of us generates what I call the paradigm of separation. It's a sense of being separate. And that sense of being separate creates an underlying anxiety within us. The ordinary man lives from a perspective that is fundamentally anxious, insatiable, and contentious. The paradigm of separation is the ordinary perspective that we are all born and raised into and conditioned and educated to accept as the reality of the human condition, when in fact it is a false perception of human nature. It has been superimposed upon human nature. On the one hand, the paradigm of separation can be considered a preliminary stage of the development of consciousness. On the other hand, it can be recognized as the neurotic state of mind in which ordinary humanity has become stuck. So the paradigm of separation is our sense of being separate, a sense of fear, a sense of endless desire and conflict. It's the very basis of the establishment in which we live, its institutions, political, economic, social, cultural. We live within a paradigm of separation, and we suffer.
You lay special emphasis on attention. How do you define attention?
I use the word attention differently than it's ordinarily used. What I mean by the word attention is not a focus or concentration of awareness, but a broadening of awareness. What I mean by the word attention is an intentional increase of our sense of being present, of our consciousness. Attention is the fulcrum that develops consciousness, that increases consciousness, so that when we learn what it means to pay attention, we discover the secret to conscious development. We apply ourselves consciously to develop ourselves, to become more conscious. What an ordinary person considers as paying attention is what I would define as concentration, where you focus yourself on a specific subject, either a sensory impression or an idea. And that's what's ordinarily recognized as attention. What I'm describing as attention is a potential in us that remains generally overlooked and unexercised, unused. If a man learns to pay attention, he learns to increase his consciousness, to become more conscious, to expand his sense of being present. That is, a sense of oneself as a whole being. So the exercise of attention is what drives conscious development.